Well, I was recently at the 100th annual Pontiac Oakland show in Pontiac, Michigan, and happened to spot this 1957 Pontiac Bonneville. Now, the Bonneville nameplate was introduced as a special model for 1957, and it was only available in convertible form. All of them were well equipped with leather seats, with power windows, power seat, power steering, power brakes, and all also were equipped with the fuel-injected engine under hood. We'll get more to that engine in a second. Regardless, this appeared to be an all-original car, and some things weren't in the best shape, but it was pretty cool to see it. Now, one thing that many people don't know is that there were only 630 Bonnevilles that were produced for the 1957 model year, one for every Pontiac dealer. And the idea here was to have this as a halo show car, and hence why this was a car that was so well equipped with so much standard equipment. And you're going to see fuel injection badges all over this car. You can see one on the fender. There's another on the trunk. Pontiac was clearly very proud of their fuel-injected setup, which was very similar to what Chevrolet had in 1957, although a little bit different. Both were engineered by AC's Rochester Products division. Now, unfortunately, the hood was open on that vehicle, so I'm going to show some pictures of another 1957 Bonneville so you can get a sense of what the overall styling looked like. Now, one of the interesting things about the 1957 Bonneville is its name itself. This would really mark the beginning of Pontiac employing quite a few French names for its vehicles. Obviously, Bonneville, Grand Prix, later the Grand Dam, and the Granville even. So Pontiac started that really with the Bonneville, although there were some other names that would make it into the lineup that clearly were not French, like the Catalina or the Star Chief. But the names of Pontiacs during this time frame were pretty synonymous with Native Americans, like the Chieftain or the Super Chief or the Star Chief. So Pontiac was really denoting a shift in its naming convention with the Bonneville. Another thing that it was really shifting away from was that silver streak look. 1956 would be the last year where you'd see those silver streaks running down the hood of the Pontiacs. You had one on either side for 1956. Here they're both gone, but I will say there's a tasteful detail in the grille. Notice that silver streak kind of texture and formula is employed in the grille, but Pontiac had gotten it off of the hood, and I suspect that by this point, Pontiac's general manager was a gentleman by the name of Bunky Knudsen, who would not only become Pontiac's leader, but would later ascend to be the president of General Motors overseas operations, then would be president of Ford Motor Company for a little bit. Regardless, what Bunky Knudsen was trying to do during this time frame was really kind of get Pontiac to embrace younger buyers and attract younger buyers into the showroom, hence the Bonneville with a fuel-injected engine under hood, and getting rid of that silver streak that had been a hallmark of Pontiac design for decades. It was just viewed as old and tired, and Pontiac before 1957 was really selling kind of boring cars for boring people. Bunky Knudsen wanted to change that, and of course, that story is history. In 1959, there was the wide-track Pontiac that came out that really just further leaned into that particular formula. And then, of course, in 1962, there was the introduction of the Grand Prix. 1964, there was the introduction of the GTO. And then Pontiac was really off to some significant sales success. And as we rotate a little bit around this car, you can see that this really was the waning era of Harley Earl style design at General Motors. Harley Earl was, of course, the vice president of design at GM. He had started GM design and really arguably started automotive design when he began the art and color section at General Motors. But by this point, I think Harley's tastes were getting a little bit, let's just say, passé. And you'll notice that the cars just have acres of chrome on them and various doodads and trims. I kind of like the rocket that you see there on the side. And of course, the color here accentuates that, this white with the red rocket on the body side. By the way, for Bonnevilles, almost all of them were this particular color combination. And you'll see as we look at the leather interior, leather again was standard on the Bonneville, that this was a pretty handsome combination. Only about a handful of them were produced in an alternate color, a charcoal gray with a matching interior, but almost all of them were this white color. And I suspect one of the reasons why Harley Earl put so much stuff on the body sides of his vehicles was that, by this point, the surface development of a lot of these cars wasn't what it would become in the 1960s. You'll notice that a lot of that bright work is not accentuating a feature line or a crease on the car. So just try to visually picture the car without any of that bright work, without that kind of rocket going down the side, without those little pieces of bright work that are behind the front wheel. And you're really left with a car that would kind of look rather pedestrian, doesn't have a lot of surfacing to the body side. It's just pretty simple. Of course, that would all change, as I mentioned, in the 1960s for General Motors. You even have on this car, it would be hard from a side profile to tell it, let's say, or to discern it as being something different than a Chevrolet. You even have that check in the belt line like the Tri-5 Chevrolets had. So a lot of commonality in the 1950s era styling, really, particularly in the early 1950s. In the mid-1950s, things started to get differentiated, but GM was admittedly behind, in particular Chrysler, during this time frame with its styling, although I do think that this still remains a handsome car. And perhaps even more handsome than the Bonneville's original namesake, a pair of bubble top kind of concept vehicles, really, that were created in the spirit of the Corvette back in 1954. And as I was mentioning, I talked about the silver streaks that you saw on Pontiacs up through 1956. Well, clearly on this Bonneville, you have those two silver streaks, but as I mentioned, by 1957, that was the first year in which they were gone. And here's a rear three-quarter view, and also what the charcoal-colored cars looked like. I have to say that the charcoal-colored variant, I think, is my favorite. Notice the exhaust coming through the bumper. That would rot your bumper out relatively easily. This one is in great shape. Of course, this car has been restored. And you kind of have a little bit of a tail fin there, but not too much. You do have the tail lamp that really is the terminating form of that rocket that was on the side. Pretty cool. I think the taillights to me remind me of a little bit of like a Packard Caribbean to some degree. Well, not necessarily the taillights themselves, but the form above them and kind of how that fin is shaped. I don't think that Pontiac was necessarily copying that at the time, although maybe they got some inspiration from the 1955 Packard rears. That might have been about the right time for some inspiration to come about. Regardless, you can see that it does have some kind of a tail fin back there. And then in the middle on the deck lid, it says fuel injection. Of course, you see Bonneville. I love the slanted letters that kind of mirror the cut line of the rear quarter panel. And beneath the Bonneville name, you'll notice that that little spear for the rocket has a little cut line. That's where the fuel filler door is on these cars. More specifically, you can see it here. This was a time during which many cars had these concealed fuel filler doors. I wish they had something like that today. I mean, now you just see the fuel filler door in all its glory on the driver's or passenger side rear quarter panel. Back in the day, they tried to disguise it so that you wouldn't even notice it. As we turn to the interior, I mentioned before that leather was standard on the Bonneville, and you got power steering, power brakes. Wait till we take a look at the brake pedal and the accelerator pedal. It's pretty cool. The brake pedal says brake, and the accelerator pedal at the top says power. Ooh. I'm surprised it didn't say power brake on the brake, but it doesn't. It does say power steering on the steering wheel, but you do get this handsome two-spoke wheel with a big horn ring and a pretty, let's say clean, uncluttered instrument panel with the horizontal speedometer. Let's zoom in a little bit on that to see more. You can see that Pontiac was very proud of the power steering, and it says power steering there in the little bubble above the Pontiac script. The astute observer will also notice that the Perndl style shift quadrant is not a Perndl. It's actually PND and then LR. The reverse is all the way at the end. This is the old school 4-speed hydromatic that General Motors had during this time frame, all the way up until 1964 in quite a few different vehicles. Great reliable transmission, not as smooth shifting though as the turbo hydromatics that would come after it. But Overall, like I said, a handsome interior in these. And as I was mentioning, here is a picture of the accelerator and the brake pedal. Notice the accelerator says power, the brake pedal says brake. I thought that was humorous. They said power for the accelerator. But, this was the 50s, and you had that kind of rocket side form. And so I guess people or buyers maybe wanted to feel like they had a little bit of a rocket underhood, although this certainly was not an Oldsmobile. And now let's turn under hood for what makes the 1957 Bonneville truly special, and that is the 315 horsepower, 347 cubic inch fuel-injected V8. Now, of course, this is not an electronic fuel injection setup. This is all mechanical fuel injection, but nonetheless, fuel injection, and was designed to help starts as well as reliability and power. And I don't know if it helped on the reliability front or even the power front. The 315 horsepower, the advertised horsepower, some people thought that was a little bit ambitious for this particular vehicle. And with the carbureted variants, the Pontiac V8s were making in the high 200 horsepowers. More specifically, you could get a 270 horsepower variant of the 347 cubic inch engine under hood. All Pontiacs were equipped with that 347 cubic inch engine for 1957. They just had different variants, 2-barrel, 4-barrel carburetor, etc. Interestingly, it was a 347 cubic inch V8 for 1957. In 1958, it would be enlarged to 370 cubic inches just for the 1958 model year. And then in 1959, it would be enlarged again to 389 cubic inches. And of course, the Pontiac V8 would stay the same in terms of overall displacement all the way from the 1959 model year through 1966, before in 1967, 389 would be enlarged to 400 cubic inches. So there's a little bit of horsepower wars going on during this time frame, as evidenced by the fact that Pontiac was kind of increasing the displacement of its engines from 57 to 58, 58 to 59. I guess after that point, for whatever reason, they decided to hold steady. They felt that they had enough power. And I will point out that though it looks aftermarket, that cold air intake that kind of snakes all the way forward and in front of the radiator, as well as the covering over the fuel injection unit, both of those are factory. Those are not aftermarket. So this is what the underhood engine compartment looked like when you bought one of these vehicles. And as I said, it was quite powerful. Remember, this was 1957. The Chevrolet, the highest horsepower you could get was 283 horsepower. So going from 283 in a 283 cubic inch engine to a 347 cubic inch engine and 315 horsepower, well, that was pretty good. You got a little pep in your step. Regardless, you had to get something pretty exotic under hood for a Pontiac that had a base price of around $6,000 in 1957, the equivalent of roughly $65,000 today. Base price, that's before air conditioning. As I said, the car was very well equipped, but it did not come standard with air conditioning. So you could basically have this Bonneville cost more than some entry-level Cadillacs pretty readily. So it really needed to be something special. And if we're honest, the Bonneville really was. Now, what do you think of the 1957 Bonneville, and what color scheme would you prefer? That kind of white and red or the charcoal gray? I think the charcoal gray in particular is just a very attractive looking car. And, the 1957 Bonneville, while I like the styling, isn't necessarily my favorite, but I really appreciate the car for what it is and how it signaled that Pontiac was moving in a completely different direction from its past and really trying to start making exciting cars and building excitement, as Pontiac would later say. Thanks again for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Put a comment in the comment section if you would, please, telling me how much you love this video. Thanks again for watching.